I'd like to welcome you to the Optimistic American, and today we're here with Commander Mark Hasara, who's going to talk about logistics in the military. Now, that may sound like a boring topic, but one of the quotes that you'll hear used in this was once said by a great general that smart men they study tactics, but brilliant men study logistics. Now, this is an individual who worked for the strategic air tankers, refueling ships inside the air for 24 years. He worked for a variety of different divisions. He served two different tours, one in Desert Storm and then another in Desert Shield. But he also worked with the nuclear deterrent program. What you're going to find when you listen to this is how important those other people who oftentimes aren't on the front lines, or at least not seen as being on the front lines, but end up providing the support, not only the risk that they take with their own lives, but more importantly, how important they are to the military. Again, it's a fun show. Now, I'm just an ordinary, optimistic American who still believes that the United States is a great cause for good. If you like what it is that we're doing, push that subscribe button and let's get going. Well, Mark, thank you very much for coming on the Optimistic American today.
I really appreciate, Paul, your invitation, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. This is going to be great.
All right, so I'm going to highly recommend your book, Tanker Pilot Lessons from the Cockpit. It's a fun book, it's enjoyable, it's a good read. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with that book, which is, and just to ask the question, what was the inspiration for the book? What were you trying to do? What was your purpose?
My kids would say, okay, yeah, Dad, story number 54. Okay. When I would talk to people.
A few of those.
And I finally said, well, I've never written a book. I flunked sixth grade spelling, and I can't type, Paul. So I actually dictated the book in Google Documents.
Wow.
And then would put it in Grammarly.com. And one of the cool things was Simon & Schuster, who published the book, that this is one of the cleanest manuscripts I ever got, we've ever got. And I kind of went, not bad for a guy that flunked sixth grade spelling, huh?
Yeah.
But my wife was actually the one who came up with the idea of putting the lessons learned at the end of each chapter. I had plenty of pictures, and I actually wrote 53 chapters. There's only 22 in the book. I wrote a whole chapter on air refueling history. How did we get air refueling? A lot of people ask that question. How in the world did we come up with that? So the combination of my kids going, Dad, you really ought to write all these things down. My very dear friend Rush Limbaugh telling me, hey, if you do this, I can really help you get it published. The fact that I had 4,000 color pictures when I left the Air Force, because I always flew with my camera in my helmet bag, Paul. And you've seen some of the pictures. I mean, they're pretty incredible pictures.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I did that because there was a hole. There was no book out there on air refueling past the Vietnam War. There was one book called Passing Gas. The guy covered, what was happening in Vietnam and the history and everything. But from then on, like Desert Storm, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, nothing. So I thought, it would be really cool if I could pull this off. And I worked on it for a couple years, but when I sat down and started writing, it took about 3 months to do it all. And I had a very peculiar process because, again, I can't type. And every pilot, particularly in the Air Force and the military, you brief on a whiteboard. And so I would go to a local university and would literally just kind of map out the chapters as an outline, take a picture of it and put it in my phone. And then I sat down with my dad and went through each of the chapters. And he would say, not that one. Not that one. Ooh, that's a really good one. That's a really good story. Okay. And we did that with the pictures, combined with the pictures. And that's how the book came about. And so when I got the manuscript done, my good buddy Rush Limbaugh said, okay, send it to me. And he sent it to his publisher, and I got a call 2 weeks later and signed a contract.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this as you're talking about putting your stuff up on Grammarly. I've been involved in the technology space for a while. I have a healthcare company, and it's a health tech company. I've been way out in front of what's going on in AI technology, and I've been hoping for a long time that we'd end up coming up with this technology that would help us do the laundry, and as well as helping us do our writing, right? And it looks like I'm going to have to keep doing the laundry, and it's going to take care of the writing for us. I'm on my third book. I haven't used it yet to do it, but there's no doubt about it. It's amazing how much easier it's become. It's helping our company in writing texts and emails and a whole series of other things. So the pictures that you talked about, I don't know if you have any of them there, but
Yeah.
you said that you went through them with your dad, and that he said, "Oh, do this one. Oh, do that one." So I know they're going to want to now see the pictures. So the
Yeah.
answer is that's just a good place for us to start.
Yeah, I was really close to my dad, Paul. I
Yeah,
love
me
my
too.
mom to death, don't get me wrong, but I was a daddy's boy, okay? And
Yeah.
um, unfortunately, he died in 2018. So, but he got to see the book published and actually got to have it in his hands, and he started bawling. He was emotional. My son
Yeah.
has written a book and it's published by Simon and Schuster. And
That, that,
we sat down and we went through the pictures. I sent 40 pictures to Simon and Schuster, Paul. And Simon and Schuster came back and said, "We can't pick which ones. You're going to have to do it." I'm like, "Hannah, why?" My editor, "Why?" She says, "We've never seen pictures like this before. We've never seen pictures of F-15s loaded with air-to-air live missiles with Iraq and Iran in the background over snow-covered, lizard-covered mountains over Turkey, and of course on an aircraft carrier deck, and just these different situations that I was in." And so the stories actually drove the pictures, because they told me, they says, "Hey, you're going to have to do this." Okay, which I did, and I sat down again with my dad and said, "Okay, let's figure out what we're going to do here." And a lot of the stories go with the picture, or excuse me, the pictures go with the stories. Um, like the opening night, the first chapter of the book, drinks for Pooh Bah's party. All right, Pooh Bah is the call sign of the brigadier general who created the air defense takedown for Baghdad in the first Gulf War. He's still alive. He's a Vietnam vet and flew what we call the Wild Weasel mission, where they go and hunt surface to air missile sites and destroy them with anti-radiation missiles. And believe it or not, Paul, when we went back the second time in 2003, guess who they went and found? And he came and briefed everybody on, here's how to do it with the new weapons that we have that we didn't have during Desert Storm. Lieutenant General Larry Poobah Henry.
what a great name. The
I
Grand
know.
Poobah,
I know the grant. That's
huh?
exactly where it comes from, because he was the expert on how to do this. Okay. He literally was. And he did it during the first Gulf War. Why wouldn't you do it in the second Gulf War? And I remember sitting in on a portion of that brief and listening to him. At the time, he was working for Lockheed. And it was amazing just listening to him in this highly classified setting, obviously, about here's how you do this. And of course, everybody's looking at me. "Okay, Mark, this is going to take a lot of gas." "Yeah, got it. It's going to take a lot of gas," it, which is fine. And that was my first combat mission, was the opening night of Desert Storm, and that's why I put that particular chapter first
Yeah,
on
what an
courage.
amazing mission. I mean, I know that when you just think about there really was a shock and awe campaign in that first Desert Storm. Just the idea that we opened up that corridor, that we did it with absolute precision missiles. I mean, it's an amazing battle all by itself. But I'm going to throw some pictures up here.
Sure, go right ahead.
All right, what's going on here?
This isn't one of my pictures. This was somebody that I interviewed on my podcast. His name is Bo Smith, okay? And his squadron is attacking this bridge in North Vietnam. And it's an amazing story because they were not using the kinds of weapons that we have now, the precision guided weapons that we have now. You can see from the explosions on the bridge and in the water that some of the weapons are on target, Paul. Some of them are not, because we didn't
Hmm.
have GPS guided weapons, and laser guided bombs were in their infancy. In their infancy. And so the airplane that you see there is called an A7 Corsair 2. And it was one of the first airplanes, Paul, that had what's called continuously calculated impact point, or CCIP. And it was revolutionary because they could get bombs a lot closer because the airplane is calculating, okay, that's the piece of real estate I'm going to drop the bomb on. Now let's do all the geometry to make sure that that's where it's going to go. It was also the first airplane that had what we called a heads-up display, where you see in modern cockpits now the big piece of glass in front of everybody.
Right.
That's the gun sight, okay? And you have to remember that gun sight now, Paul, is in the helmet.
That's amazing.
All of it is what we call helmet-mounted display, okay? So this is dropping regular gravity drop bombs and using new computer power, a new heads up display, and everything to do it. And that airplane was one of the first ones to have that. And so you can see the dark clouds where the dark explosions where the bombs are hitting the target. You can see the big splash explosions. And these are 2,000-pound bombs that they're dropping on it. Maybe 1,000. But as I look at it, look at the height of the geysers and everything, I'm thinking they're 2,000-pound bombs. And I want you to think about this, your listeners to think about this now. We're using the same exact bomb, Mark 84, 2,000-pound bombs. But when you put a Boeing GPS guidance package on it, you're going from what we call a circular air of maybe 300 feet to maybe 3 meters or
Oh
less.
my.
Okay. And we have gotten so good at this that now the size of the bomb has also decreased because we can now precisely send a bomb to a target and you don't need all that boom anymore. Okay. Now, of course, there's certain targets like a bridge like this, you're still probably going to use a 2,000-pound bomb because you have to take it off of the abutment. That's how you destroy bridges. And that's what's being bombed here.
All right. So pull up some other pictures here.
This is a story out of the book. And this is, you asked about, tell me some of the, the elements of lessons learned that you had in the book. And this is a really good one. The tankers are always at the end of the planning whip, as we say. We're always the last thing everybody thinks about, but the first thing that they need. These 3 airplanes are about 40 miles inside of Iraqi airspace. They have less than 6 to 10 minutes of gas in their tanks, and they're going to run out. The engines are going to flame out, and there's 32 of them.
Wow.
I was number 3 in a 4-ship of tankers. We came in, and the Lieutenant Colonel Planner says, "Are you coming in to fly?" To my crew. And I said, "Yeah." Says, "Your mission's canceled. Go to mission planning and wait for me there." And he told us that this mission had already taken off, but they hadn't had time to schedule what's called its post-strike refueling. In other words, when it's coming out after dropping bombs. And he said, "You guys have 35 minutes to take off and meet these guys. Otherwise, we're going to have the largest combat search and rescue in Air Force history." because they're all going to run out of gas. So we took off, and normally it takes 45 minutes just to do the pre-flight of the airplane. But fortunately, all of the airplanes were in a situation we call cocked on, where all they had to do is jump in the jets, start the engines, and go. And we left as a 4-ship. Dan Favorite from Beale was leading. Heidi Hernandez from Wurtsmith Air Force Base was number 2. I was number 4 with my crew, number 3, excuse me. And then we had a Kansas Air National Guard crew. His call sign was Walrus because he had this great big handlebar mustache. And we took off and we headed north, and the airborne control airplane says, go as far north as you dare go. Well, what does that mean? We're a tanker. We have no defensive systems. We have no way of knowing if we're even being threatened. And they just said, go as far north as you dare go. So gathering up our courage, we turned north. And you have to remember, those are air-to-air missiles on the wingtips, but they don't have the gas to fight anybody. The captain that came to our boom for gas had 800 pounds in the tanks. The gauge in the F-16 has a tolerance of 300 pounds, plus or minus. So he had about 6 minutes of flying time when we connected with it. All of the airplanes we cycled through, we had 4 8-ships, okay? And we cycled them all through, gave them each 1,000 pounds, then cycled them through again to give them their go-home gas. And we saved them. Another tanker saved. And so they went up above us, and then the Airborne Warning Control Station, their call sign was Choctaw, said, tuna flight, turn west now, 290 heading. And we're thinking, we're in trouble. Something's coming up after us. No, it wasn't. They were sending us over to the rescue of a downed F-14 crew that had gotten shot down that night. And the A-10s were on the scene, and the helicopters, Moccasin 05 and 06, great big Pavlo helicopters, were on their way in to pick up the pilot. The backseat of the radar intercept officer was captured. But Boots Jones, we were able to pick him up. And there's a famous picture of him being picked up and the pararescue guy getting off the helicopter, going out, grabbing him, throwing him in the helicopter, and then them taking off.
Wow.
This story comes full circle, Paul, about 20 years later, when I'm teaching at the Joint Forces Staff College. And my commander says, hey, we got somebody here you need to go meet. And he points across the room and he says, do you know who that is? And I did. And I walked up to this Navy captain, shook his hand, and I said, I am Lt Colonel Mark Hasara, call sign Sluggo. I was covering your rescue, Boots. I was one of the tankers that was above you that was giving gas to the A-10s when you're getting picked up. And he looks at me and he gets this big smile on his face. He goes, Sluggo, drinks are on me, man. Drinks are on me. And that's awesome. Pretty common, okay?
Yep. All right, walk me through some more pictures. What's going on here?
So I tell people to learn everything they can about their customers. And these are our customers. These are F-15s. I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, Paul, and we had 3 F-15 squadrons. The 12th, the 44th Vampires, and the 67th Fighting Cocks. And we became a combined wing. And one of the great things about becoming a combined wing is our wing commander said, I want all of you flying in each other's airplanes. When you hear a voice on the radio, I want you to know exactly who that tongue belongs to, I think is how he said it. I'm actually flying in the back of an F-15. You can see there's 4 of them here. And we're heading kind of north of the island to do something. And I had 3 rides in the F-15 while I was stationed in Okinawa and got to see air refueling from the other side. And I learned when I was in business, we don't ask enough questions of our customers. We don't ask them, first of all, how are we doing? Second of all, what do we need to change? And because our wing commander, Jeff Cliver, one of the greatest commanders I ever worked for, opened all the cockpits, we became a really, really tight-knit, cohesive unit because we knew how each other operated. As a tanker providing gas to our customers, we became more knowledgeable in how the F-15 does their business. So that during an exercise, I knew that the F-15s were going to be late to their mission. And I intuitively knew that I needed to ask permission from air traffic control in northern Japan to start heading toward where they were supposed to pick up their mission, refueling them at the same time. And when they got back to Okinawa, Japan, Rotor Schroeder, he was the commander of the 12th Fighter Squadron. He goes, "Sluggo, I love you, man." You know, because we had taken the time to learn how our customers did business. And each group that we dealt with had their own culture, had their own requirements, and learning those requirements made me a better tanker pilot because I knew how they operated.
What a great business lesson. Have you ever heard the story about the dog and the bear? It's kind of a interesting story.
No,
So,
tell me about it.
well, you're telling the story in a much better way than I can, just because of that experience and being and letting people see the actual effect that it had. But the idea is that you should try to know what happens before you, what in the supply chain, what happens before you, who are the people that you're buying from, and then who you're selling to. And if you know that on both sides, you really begin to gain a better understanding of how to deliver a product. The story of the dog and the bear, when I teach salespeople, I always will use this. I'll say, okay, one of you be the bear, one of you be the dog. Whoever is the dog, I want you to convince the bear why it is that the bear should want to be a dog, right? And so, people will always go through it. They'll say, well, being a dog, you're in a house, you get better food, people are taking care of you, blah, 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 blah. But the people who pass the test in sales do the following. They say, what's it like to be a bear? Oh, do you enjoy it? Oh, what's it like to be outside? Do you like being outside? Oh, how's the food? Have you ever eaten food out of a garbage can? Did you like that better than the food that you were getting with the berries on the field? Because until you understand how the bear sees it, you can't sell them what you're trying to sell. We oftentimes think, I have product A, and I'm going to sell it to you with zero understanding of what it is that the customer actually wants. You're doing the same thing here. You get to know what the customer wants, and it changes everything.
Everything, Paul. And this is a great segue into this picture here, okay? This is an F-14 Tomcat, all right, right out of the movie Top Gun, okay? This is Top Hatter 111. Okay, you can see, the triple ones on the nose there, right below the red basket. I want you to notice he's carrying live missiles.
Wow.
Live Sparrows, live Sidewinders, just like we're in the movie. Just like we're used in the movie.
Yep.
I took this picture during Desert Shield, and I had just been out to the aircraft carrier, John F. Kennedy. And this is another one of those great stories. As a tanker pilot in Strategic Air Command, we had no idea how the Navy did their business. We had no idea what their requirements were. We would just hang that basket out there, let them refuel. And you have to remember, they have to put that probe in there. They fly it into that basket. And they would go off and do whatever it was with the gas. And I told myself in Desert Storm 1991, if I ever had the opportunity to change the way the tanker community does business with the Navy, I was going to do it. I was chosen to be part of the initial cadre for what has now become the KC-135 Weapons School, which is our Top Gun-like advanced school on global air refueling. I was the only one on cadre that had been on an aircraft carrier. And I now had the opportunity to change the way our community serviced the Navy. And of course, how do you do that? How do you create literally a syllabus for dealing with the Navy from nothing? You go to Top Gun. You go to Fallon, Nevada, where the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center is, and you go, this is what I'm trying to do. Help me do it. And they showed me a manual that they call the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Manual, which had everything that they do, how they do it, defensive, offensive, long range strikes, everything in that. I spent 5 hours teaching our students out of that book, a Navy publication. And then at the end of the day, we would fly down to San Diego and we do a tour on what's called the Air Operations Center afloat ship, the USS Coronado, either an Aegis cruiser, guided missile cruiser, or a guided missile destroyer, because they're the ones that are directing us and they're also the ones that are protecting us. And then we would actually go out to sea on a carrier for overnight. And they got to experience, these students got to experience everything that the Navy was doing and see it all. We had 17 training objectives just on the carrier alone. I think we had 15 on the cruiser, and I think we had 14 on the USS Coronado. It was really intense school. Now, fast forward to 9/11. Our third class was going through. And believe it or not, we had gone to the carrier, the USS Enterprise, for our trip. That was the lead carrier for the airstrikes in the opening campaign. And the Air Wing commander looked at one of our tanker graduates and says, I know you from somewhere. I know you from somewhere. He goes, sir, my name is Dewey. I was one of those tanker guys that came aboard your carrier as part of the KC-135. We call it then the Combat Employment School. I'm the guy that's going to be here to help plan the gas. And I understand that he turned around and goes, guys, this tanker guy is smart, knows how we do business because he knows it right out of the Strike and Air Warfare. And so, again, we had the opportunity as a cadre of 12 of us to really change how our community did business. And I got to tell you, Paul, we got beat up. We're not a weapon. We don't have weapons. This is the craziest thing anybody's ever done. I had a squadron commander tell me, this is the stupidest thing AMC's ever done. We should take you guys and put you in squadron so you can teach all of this. And I told her, I looked at her, I says, that's exactly what we're trying to do with this school. And so now the school we just had our 25th anniversary. We've got 242 graduates.
Wow.
And all of them are smart on how the Navy does business. And Desert Storm and Kosovo proved that we were woefully inadequate when it came to servicing the Navy until this school stood up. And then operations in Afghanistan and Iraq proved that now we had those graduates who were smart enough, and the air refueling stuff went way smoother than it did during Desert Storm and Kosovo. Much, much smoother.
So we've seen, by the way, it's interesting you're talking about the Enterprise. I ended up on it in the 1980s when Reagan bombed Tripoli. But yeah, it was what a ship. But in any event, we've had some colossal mistakes made in the military when the different divisions weren't able to cooperate, weren't able to work together, and including what the rescue mission that happened during the hostage crisis back in the 1980s with Jimmy Carter. That a lot of that was interdepartmental miscommunications, where they didn't have the ability to communicate. Do you see those problems being fixed more by upper command or by people doing just what you did? People who were at the actual serviceman level saying, hey, we're going to go out and we're going to try to figure out how to service our customer? What is it that actually helps that communication work better?
Paul, that's a great question, okay? Because there have been operations, particularly during Afghanistan, where we didn't learn that lesson. We call it the titanium cylinders of excellence, okay? Because some people stay so stovepiped, you know, this is all I've ever known, this is all I've ever done, this is the way we do it. And in many ways, they don't look at, hey, here might be an 80% solution that is a better way to do this. Anaconda in March of 2002, Paul, is the classic example of this, where the Army gave us their requirements like 3 days before the operation was to kick off, and it went poorly. It did not go well. We had a friendly fire incident within 60 seconds of the opening of Anaconda, and then we had a Navy SEAL fall off the back of a helicopter on the top of a mountain called Takur Ghar, which became known as the Battle of Roberts Ridge. And your listeners can go out and Google that. There's all kinds of things that come up about that. So you have to remember, I'm watching this in real time from the Predator video on a 40-foot screen. And we got surprised because, again, the Army didn't tell us what they needed. And we always say, cheap, quick, or easy, and you can only have two. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
If you want it quick, it isn't going to be cheap and it's not going to be easy. And that was what happened here. And it was because there was a breakdown in communication between the services. And there was a breakdown, big breakdown in command and control. Who is running the show? And unless you have those clear lines of, here's the daddy rabbit, here's the next level of leadership, and here's all the people doing the work, then things are going to go wrong. And you see it in companies all the time where they have a certain culture, or the CEO has certain things that he wants to do or she wants to do. And it really messes up a company and messes up their bottom line if you don't have all these different groups talking to each other. And when I left the Air Force, I worked for a company that was that way, where you had everything stovepipe. And I remember going into a meeting, a critical meeting with senior executives, senior leadership. And I asked one of them, I said, when was the last time you had a meeting like this? And he said, about 3 years ago. And I said, you're kidding me. I said, we're the services. We're supposed to support the stuff that they make. And you guys haven't been in a meeting for 3 years? And of course, that program suffered. Matter of fact, we lost the program. So we lost revenue because of it. We lost customer reputation because of it. All right. Those kinds of things. That communication piece is really critical. And again, you asked me about what are some of the elements of leadership and lessons learned. And my very first one is relationship. Establishing those relationships. A lot of companies think that you can't go and visit one of your customers unless you're bringing home some bag of money. No. I'm just meeting the customer for the first time. They don't know who I am. I don't know who they are. We need to establish that relationship. And I noticed when I was in business, in the business world, the people that I had the best relationships with were the ones that not only were we able to solve some really, really complex problems, but they would sign 5, 10, even 20-year contracts with us to maintain helicopters or jets or whatever. And because we had established those relationships and actually spent time with them, again, asking, what are your requirements? What do you need from us? Here's what we think. What do you guys think? And then adjusting accordingly. We signed a 20-year contract, folks, and it was an international customer
Hmm.
because I was able to establish those relationships and tell them, hey, here's how we can do this. And here are the building blocks of this service that we're going to offer you. And you don't have to have them all, but here's the advantages and disadvantages of having them.
Yeah, and I've seen the data points on this, certainly in my companies, but also in others that we've invested in. Overwhelmingly, if you look at the lifetime value of a customer and you apply two different salespeople to it, one salesperson who's totally transactional and another salesperson who is relationship driven, who tells the truth to the customer, who tells them what our challenges are, who tells them what the hurdles will be when we're implementing it, it's not even close. The one who builds the relationship, that tells the truth, that makes certain they're working with the customer, while they may lose a few more customers in the process, their lifetime value of their customers that they're bringing in are so much higher than the guy who wants to see himself as a transactional broker, just connecting buyer and seller as fast as they can and moving on to the next deal.
Absolutely. Great
Yeah.
words, Paul.
All right, so
Hey.
you all. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the second one on that list was being in a leadership position. Trust your people, because I found, Paul, that the greatest amount of innovation in a team is when you trust your people and you tell them this is what needs to be done and let them do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with several teams, particularly during the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, where I had some folks, guys and gals working for me, that were truly experts at their craft, had the experience, and in many ways solved some very complex international problems with some very innovative solutions that worked really well. And, Murphy's Laws of Combat, there's one of them that says, if it's stupid, but it's work, it's not stupid. And really that's
Yeah.
true. And there were
Yeah,
numerous
Napoleon
times.
said they asked him which generals he liked. He said the lucky ones.
Yeah, exactly. The lucky one. Okay. And we came up with some really innovative solutions that had never been used before in combat. And it was because of the people that I had around me and giving them the authority to act and to create some of these really, really innovative ways of dealing with things. Okay. The air base at Bagram ran out of gas during Operation Anaconda. And there are no fuel trucks in Afghanistan like you see running around at Maverick stations and everything. They don't have that. And they were going to have to drive through Al Qaeda's territory in order to get to Bagram. And so one of my guys came up with the idea, Sluggo, why don't we just airmail the gas? And I said, tell me what you're thinking. He says, well, we'll send the first C-17 into Bagram filled with the big bladders, and then it will pump out some of its gas. We'll put a tanker somewhere near Bagram, and then the C-17 will take off, go up, get like 80,000 pounds more of gas, but enough gas so it can still land at its landing weight, offload that, and then go home. And we'll just keep that going with 3 flights a day to fill those bladders up until they can't stand it anymore. And finally, 3 days later, the commander of Bagram says, no mas, stop, because we had 300,000 gallon bladders filled with gas at Bagram, and they had what they needed. And that was just because 2 people were allowed, and I'm saying allowed, to think up some really, really cool solutions to a really complex problem where we couldn't force protect any truck or any vehicle driving to Bagram right through the heart of Al Qaeda and Taliban territory, but we could do it with an airplane coming in right overhead and landing and putting these bladders out and doing it. So
All
I
right, so
would,
I'm going to change the subject just a little bit on you. I want to go to the Strategic Air Command on nuclear deterrence.
sure.
And I know that you worked with them. Can you tell me a little bit about their mission, the role that you played there, the challenges that they face, and the important role that it plays for the United States?
In 1985, when I came into the Air Force during the Reagan Cold War era, there was a lot going on. Okay. Premier Gorbachev in Russia and Reagan saying, hey, let's meet and let's talk. But those talks broke down. Okay. But since the late 1950s, when we began the Cold War, we actually had nuclear armed airplanes on alert that could take off in less than 10 minutes that were ready to go, all loaded up with their tanker support. And at Pease Air Force Base, where I was stationed, the 509th Bomb Wing had what was called FB 111. So it's a swing wing fighter bomber, but they're nuclear capable. Each one of these airplanes was carrying 4 nuclear weapons, either the B 61 nuclear bomb, like we still use today, or what they called a short range attack missile, which had about a 100-mile range. And that was that nuclear deterrence, the weapons of mass destruction and mutually assured destruction. That was at that time period the national strategy. And so every third week, I would go on a Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, show up at an underground facility that had command and control, all kinds of things in it, uh, a cafeteria, my own room, everything, waiting for a klaxon to go off, and we would run out to our trucks. The trucks would go out to the airplanes. We'd hop in the airplanes, start the engines, and off we'd go as a nuclear strike package. And because we had FB 111s, which are low altitude strike aircraft with terrain following radar, we also had the name of it was Giant Lance, I think, where there may be some entity or country or something where the national leadership says we're just going to go drop a tactical nuke on them, and we had that mission too. Now, these were some very interesting days because, as you know, the wall's coming down, and the Soviet Union is kind of in a bad place, because everybody touts,
Being broken up.
yeah, it's being broken up, and this entity that had been our enemy for so long is now breaking into pieces, and some of those pieces now have become our allies, and some of those pieces are kind of still the way they are or they were back then. You know, we still have this nuclear deterrent mission. You just don't see it kind of in your face like we used to during the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And for a time period, Paul, there was actually airborne alert. It was called Chrome Dome, where you had B-52s that would fly with nuclear weapons in the Aegean Sea, the North Atlantic, and everything, waiting for the message to go in and drop that nuclear weapon or weapons on targets in Russia. And I downloaded not too long ago, they just declassified it. Well, they declassified it about 10 years ago. The actual Strategic Air Command operations during the Cuban crisis of 1962 is what it's called. Your listeners, if you Google that, it will come right up. And it's chilling. There's 1,003 tankers on alert, and there's 72 bombers flying Chrome Dome missions in a 24-hour period, all of them loaded with. I think about that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that was a time period where truly, I remember my mom and dad being very anxious, and my mom actually tears in her eyes because she's thinking my family's going to get nuked during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed. But for a long time, we had that nuclear assured destruction as our policy for national security, until 1990 when it went away. And now the world is more conventional, as we would say. But look at the threats we're facing now, too. You have China, Russia, Iran, and all of those things, all of those entities are now fighting. And I tell all my friends, Paul, we are in the early stages of a third world war, because it looks just like the beginning of the Second World War and all the things that were going on then.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's a beginning stage of a new world war or a cold war, but it's one of the two, right? And I'm not sure exactly which one it is. From my standpoint, I spent a lot of time studying what we did in the Cold War and taking a look at what happened. It's part of the process that we have in a new book that my partner and I wrote called "What's Right with America." But if there were lessons that we learned from the Cold War that we should not forget, and the most important lesson was the issue that revolved around containment. Now, how do you contain somebody like the Soviet Union? Well, there were a variety of things that were important. One of the things that was important was to make certain that you came from a position of strength. Because if you didn't come from a position of strength, you were actually egging on a first strike from the other side.
Absolutely.
You had to have the ability to respond. And people don't understand this, but it's so important that there were men and women doing what you were doing in that role, because if you weren't there doing it, we actually would have been more at risk of a nuclear war, not less at risk. The second thing that was important was have allies. You have to make certain that you have allies. That's why NATO was so important. In my opinion, that's why Israel is so important. Ukraine is important. You have to understand the importance of it. The third one is you have to find a way to break them apart. What's going on in the world right now is China, Iran, and Russia have come together. And the only thing that binds them together, they have huge divisions amongst them. But the one thing that pulls them together is they're terrified about Western liberal democracy. They see that as a threat because of the prosperity that's there, because of their people who are looking for those same types of freedoms. And the more they can push it back, the better. And the last one, it's not the last, but to me, the most important one is to recognize our system is better. It's just better. It's better in that we not only have free elections, but that we have free enterprise, that we have free markets, that we have civil liberties that we've given to people. And those liberties empower the individual. And over time, they create better and new products. That's not what happens in a state-controlled economy. So if you can make it for a long enough period of time, even though they may have these humps where they look strong, they'll fall on their own. But if you don't have that strength going all the way back to the beginning, if you're not preserving the strength that we have, you're going to be in big trouble. You're going to lose that Western liberal democracy that's done so much to promote human progress. So here's my question to you. Are we prepared? Do we have the things that we need? Is our military being given the tools that they need to be successful? What are you worried about?
The thing that I'm worried about right now is we're using systems that are 50 years old or more. The B-52.
I'd explain that to me.
The B-52, the KC-135, the first one came off the assembly line in 1955. I came off the assembly line in 1957. Okay? So they call it recapitalization. And one of the great things that you talk about, peace through strength. Ronald Reagan, peace through strength.
Mm-hmm.
The buildup during his time period, look at that. A lot of those airplanes that were created during his time frame in the 1980s, the F-117, the F-15, those kinds of airplanes. Think about that. We're still flying those. We're taking some of our even more modern airplanes and retiring them. There's only 3 KC-10s still on the ramp out of 59. The rest of them have gone to the boneyard. And our motto in the tanker community is nobody kicks ass without tanker gas. Nobody. And I feel, and again, this is my opinion, Paul, we have a shortfall in the ability to refuel the force. We have a 60-year-old airplane that we're still using, and it's still going strong and probably will for a long time. We just got rid of an airplane that was newer by about 30 years, and we now have a replacement that has trouble and is problematic. And they just found another tier 1 issue with the airplane. Just they announced it a couple days ago. So from a tanker's perspective, where my expertise is, I'm worried. I'm worried that we cannot get our troops and material and our assets to a location where they need to be within 48 hours. I'm worried that we have shaved the defense budget in such a way that it truly has impacted national security. And there's lots of people writing about this, retired generals, and even some of the generals that have been up on the Hill and have testified have said, we're at a precipice here. But we've got one thing going for us, though, Paul, and that is the American servicemen and women. The American serviceman and woman are extremely motivated, highly trained, are ready to do the mission, and in a lot of cases, that in and of itself is also a deterrent, because people know that if the U.S. Marines show up, it's not going to be a good day. Okay. It's not going to be a good day. And I'll say the same thing for the Army, the Air Force, even the Coast Guard.
I think the point that you made today, though, that's so powerful is when the United States Marines show up, they really don't show up by themselves. There's generally a whole package of people, oftentimes with interdisciplines that come from the Air Force, the Navy, as well as the Army. It's important that they have to work together or learn to work together, because the better they work together, the higher the likelihood of the success of the mission.
Absolutely. And we will never fight another war. You know, the Air Force is going to go do some no-fly zone or something like that. All right. And let me tell your listeners, if you ever hear a politician say, oh, we're going to do a no-fly zone, I want you to remember these numbers. An F-15 C model burns 8,000 pounds an hour at tactical speeds, 2,000 pounds a minute in afterburner. It takes 18 tanker sorties to keep an F-15 4-ship airborne for a 24-hour period. And that does not assume that they're engaging enemy aircraft, because as soon as they do
that number for me again. So if you, to keep one F-15 up, how many tankers does it take?
To keep a 4-ship of F-15 C models airborne for a 24-hour period, it takes 18 tanker sorties.
Goodness.
18 tanker sorties. KC-135 sorties. Okay. They burn 8,000 pounds an hour, 2,000 pounds a minute in afterburner. And the problem is, if they start engaging aircraft, Paul, the first thing that comes off is the centerline tank, the ability to carry gas. They just lost 4,000 pounds of available fuel, because now they're going for maneuverability versus how much gas I have. The external tanks on the wings don't really restrict their maneuverability. By that, I mean G-force. The centerline does. Okay. The F-22, similar. The F-22 burns at a little bit higher rate because it has what's called super cruise, where they can be in what's called mil power and still be supersonic because the jet's so clean. And the F-35 is not a big airplane, doesn't hold a lot of gas, so it's going to require air refueling quite a bit. So, you know, I think it was Helmuth von Moltke, the great Prussian general, said, smart men study tactics, brilliant men study logistics.
Yeah. So for the F-15, F-35, how long can they actually be engaged in a combat mission or in combat before they need refueling?
For the F-15s, it was about every 45 minutes. For the F-16s, it was about every 30 minutes. I'm assuming the F-35 is about the same because it has a similar fuel load. All right.
Mm-hmm.
The F-15E Strike Eagles carry a lot of gas, and so a little bit more.
So when these guys have to leave to go get refueled, do you have to worry about making certain that you're keeping your tankers in a place where they're not going to be hit by the bogeys on the other side?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Okay. So
How do you do that?
you have another 4 ship of F-15s that are called the high value asset attack or defensive counter airplanes protecting airplanes like the tankers, the airborne warning control system, the AWACS, the rivet joint, the electronic intelligence airplane, the joint stars that's looking at the ground, with this ground mapping radar, and then what's called the EC-130. They're being replaced by what's called the EC-137. It's a Gulfstream airplane they're being replaced with because again, those airplanes are so old. The C-130s are so old. They had to do something with that. They had to recapitalize on that. So all of these airplanes go into this big stack of airplanes when you're doing, a major war. The opening night of Shock and Awe, I think we did 9.7 million pounds in 24 hours. The day before we went into Baghdad, 2 days before we went into Baghdad, we were at 17.5 million pounds a day because again, we support the ground forces and they were close to Baghdad. We had to be there to help them. And we had a sandstorm go through that kind of threw a wrench into that. So here's something else for your listeners. And again, Tom and I talked about this. I sent you this. In the 26 days of the Shock and Awe campaign, we transferred from tankers 417,133,000 pounds of jet fuel in 26 days. That will allow a Ford F-150 truck, if my math is right, to make 2,685 round trips to the moon or 7 round trips to the sun. We ran the United Arab Emirates out of gas. It wasn't capable of producing the amount of jet fuel that we required at one base that we had tankers at. We were using 1.8 million gallons a day, and they were only capable of producing 1.2. So
Study logistics. Yep.
again, yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Smart men study tactics, brilliant men study logistics. And, you know, that's all part of tanker math. And when I was driving into work on 9/11, I got a phone call from my wing commander 3 minutes after the second airplane hit saying, send Mark in right now. I saw it hit. I knew it was happening. I was already in the shower getting ready. For some reason, I didn't want to go to work with messy hair. I don't know why, but because I didn't know when I was going to come home. But we were going to use 144 tanker sorties and probably about 12 million pounds in a 24-hour period just to defend, let's see, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego. Those are some incredible numbers, man.
All right. So here's my last question to you. I could spend all day doing this. I could spend all day going through your pictures. Those are wonderful. And again, we'll put your website up online so people can go through and look at them themselves. But here's my last question to you, and this is just as a matter of my own personal interest. You dedicated your life to the service of this country. There are other things that you could have done, and other things that I would almost guess would have made you a lot more money. You instead dedicated your life to this country. Now, there are amazing things that this country has done in battle. We have an amazing military, as you had spoken about, the servicemen and women who work for this country. Every time I'm around them, I find myself in awe, whether it's on a ship or at an Air Force base or out in the field. They're an amazing group of people. But what's the reason? What is it about this country that motivates you so much that you would not only put your full life into service, but actually risk your life for it? What is it that is about this country that drives you?
Oh, Paul, that's a great question. You know that? Two things. Defending your family and my family from people that would literally destroy our values that were placed in the Constitution by our founding fathers. And the second one, being able to give other people around the globe the opportunity to enjoy those same freedom of religion, of freedom of speech. I mean, just talk about those two, you know, those are the two driving forces that I thought of, that came to my mind when I went into the military. Support and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that oath of office, as you know, does not have a timestamp on it. All of us retirees could be called back at any moment. Okay. Would I fit back in my uniform? Well, I tell people when they ask me, you know, when did you leave the Air Force? Well, about 30 pounds ago, you know?
Yeah, it happens to us all, Mark. Don't feel too bad about that.
But you know what, Paul? If I could go back to a command center and use my command center expertise and experience, that would allow a pilot, a young pilot, guy or gal, go back to the cockpit and do their job, I'd do it. I'd do it.
Well, Mark, God bless you. I want to tell you, I can't tell you how much I appreciate not only being on our show, but I really appreciate the service that you've given to this country and the education that you've given to me and to my listeners today. You know, it's what I really love about this conversation and listening to you is it is so easy to focus on the guy in the cockpit in the F-16 and to forget about all the work with all the people that come behind them that is so essential and that are taking not only those same risks, but that without them, there's no chance we'd be successful. Thank you for all you've done. Godspeed.
Well, I appreciate your kind words, Paul, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show today. My book, Tanker Pilot, is on Amazon. I just had a reprint done, and my YouTube channel is just at Mark Hasara. If you want to go by it, all of my podcasts are there, and I do a lot of shorts. I had 100,000 subscribers in 117 days. It went pretty fast.
You know, I went to that site to just watch a few so that I could have a better idea of today's show, and I found myself going beyond what I needed to just listening to the next story. So it was definitely fun. And again, thanks for doing it.
I've reduced your productivity long enough, huh?
Well, Mark, thank you again. We appreciate you being on today.
Thanks again, Paul, for having me on. I really enjoyed being with you. This was great. Thanks.
Awesome.